There was a time when I lived by the expectations of others, tangled in the web of who I thought I needed to be. I would wake up every morning and adjust the mask, carefully molding myself into a version that would be acceptable, pleasing even. It was a performance, an exhausting one, and yet I convinced myself it was necessary. I believed that if I could maintain the illusion of perfection, I would earn the respect, the validation, and maybe even the love that I so deeply longed for. But there's something insidious about pretending, something that slowly erodes your sense of self, because every time you trade your authenticity for acceptance, you lose another piece of who you are. And at first, it doesn't seem like much, a little compromise here, a small lie there. You tell yourself that it's worth it, that it's for the greater good, that people respect strength, not vulnerability. But over time, something happens. You wake up one day and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. You've become a reflection of what the world wants rather than a manifestation of who you truly are. And here's the thing about perfection. It's a fragile, suffocating illusion. It demands that you hide your struggles, suppress your doubts, and deny your own humanity. But life, real life, is found in the cracks, in the messiness, in the moments where you have the courage to stand as you are, unfiltered and unashamed. I had to learn this the hard way. I had to watch my carefully curated identity crumble before I could understand that I was never meant to be perfect. I was meant to be real. I was meant to be someone who stumbles but stands back up, someone who wrestles with doubt but moves forward anyway, someone who refuses to be defined by the weight of other people's expectations. And maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you've spent years playing a role, convincing yourself that if you just keep it together, if you just keep pushing, you'll finally feel whole. But the truth is, you'll never find peace in a persona. You'll never find fulfillment in an image. Because authenticity isn't just about honesty with the world, it's about being honest with yourself. And if you can't face yourself in the quiet moments, if you can't sit in your own presence without feeling like an imposter, then no amount of applause will ever be enough. People will tell you that success requires sacrifice, and they're right. But the worst sacrifice you can make is the one that costs you your soul. What good is achievement if it leaves you feeling empty? What good is admiration if the person they admire isn't really you? And yet we live in a world that rewards the facade. Social media glorifies perfection, society praises those who appear unshaken, and we internalize the belief that to be accepted, we must conceal the parts of ourselves that feel weak, broken, or uncertain. But let me tell you something. Strength isn't found in the mask. It's found in the willingness to take it off. It's found in the moment you decide that you would rather be real and misunderstood than polished and imprisoned. It's found in the courage to say, this is me, flaws and all, and I refuse to apologize for existing as I am. And here's what's remarkable. When you step into authenticity, you give others permission to do the same. When you stand in your truth, unafraid and unapologetic, you become a beacon for those who are still trapped in the illusion. Because deep down, we all long for something real. We crave connection, not performance. We respect resilience, not artificial perfection. But let me warn you, choosing authenticity is not the easy path. It will cost you. It will cost you the approval of those who only valued your mask. It will cost you the comfort of fitting in. It will cost you the illusion of safety that comes with conformity. But what you gain in return is immeasurable. You gain a peace that is unshaken by the opinions of others. You gain a strength that is rooted in something real. And most importantly, you gain yourself. So if you've been living in the shadows of expectation, if you've been contorting yourself into someone you're not just to earn a seat at the table, I want to challenge you, walk away. Walk away from the need to be perfect. Walk away from the pressure to perform. Walk away from anything that forces you to be less than who you are. Because the moment you embrace authenticity, the moment you stop seeking validation from the outside world, you'll discover something extraordinary. You were enough all along. And that is where your true power begins. Pain is an inevitable part of life, and yet we spend so much time trying to run from it. We avoid it, suppress it, pretend it isn't there, as though denial will somehow make it disappear. But pain does not vanish simply because we refuse to acknowledge it. It lingers, it festers, it waits, and the more we resist it, the more power it has over us. We build our lives around avoiding suffering, but in doing so, we construct cages of our own making. The reality is, the very thing we fear, pain, struggle, adversity, is the thing that has the potential to shape us in ways comfort never could. I used to believe that pain was a punishment, that if I was struggling, it must mean I had done something wrong, that I had somehow failed. And that belief kept me trapped. It made me resent every hardship, every setback, every moment of despair. But what I failed to see at the time was that pain was not my enemy. It was my teacher. It was forcing me to confront the parts of myself that I would have otherwise ignored. It was sharpening me, strengthening me, preparing me for something greater than I could understand in that moment. There is something about suffering that strips away all illusions. It forces you to see yourself as you truly are, without the distractions, without the noise. It exposes your weaknesses, your fears, your insecurities, and that's uncomfortable because we don't like to face those things. We would rather keep them buried, hidden beneath layers of distraction, ambition, and pride. But growth does not happen in the absence of pain. It happens when you lean into it, when you stop running and start listening to what it has to teach you. And yet we are told that pain is something to be avoided at all costs, that if we are struggling, we should numb it, silence it, escape it. But what happens when we do that? What happens when we push away our suffering instead of confronting it? It doesn't disappear, it simply manifests in different ways. It turns into bitterness, resentment, anxiety, a slow creeping sense of emptiness that we can't quite explain. We chase success, relationships, material things, hoping that if we just achieve enough, have enough, do enough, we can outrun the pain. But it's still there, waiting. Because pain is not meant to be ignored, it is meant to be understood. Some of the strongest people you will ever meet are the ones who have walked through fire and emerged not as victims, but as warriors. Not because they never felt the weight of their suffering, but because they refused to let it define them. They refused to let it break them. They allowed it to shape them, to refine them, to build within them a strength they never knew they possessed. And that is the choice we all must make. You can either allow your pain to destroy you, or you can allow it to transform you. You can let it make you bitter, or you can let it make you wiser. You can let it convince you that life is unfair and that you are powerless, or you can take what you've been given and turn it into something meaningful. And that choice, that decision, is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. I have seen people crumble under the weight of their suffering, and I have seen people rise because of it. And the difference was never in the pain itself, it was in how they chose to respond to it. Some allowed their wounds to become excuses, reasons to stay stagnant, reasons to give up. Others took those same wounds and turned them into fuel, into purpose, into a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Because pain, when faced head-on, has the power to reveal truths that comfort never could. It teaches you what truly matters. It strips away the superficial, the unnecessary, and forces you to confront the essence of who you are. And that kind of clarity is invaluable, because once you know who you are, once you have stood in the fire and survived, there is very little in this world that can shake you. There is a kind of strength that can only be forged in hardship, a kind of wisdom that can only come from walking through the darkness. And if you have ever suffered, if you have ever felt broken, then you are standing on the edge of something powerful. Because the worst things that have happened to you do not have to be the things that define you. They can be the things that refine you. The things that give you depth, resilience, and an unshakable sense of self. And if you're in the middle of it right now, if you're still in the fire, still struggling to find your way out, I want you to remember this. Your pain is not meaningless. Your suffering is not wasted. There is something being built in you, even if you cannot see it yet. And one day you will look back and you will realize that the moments that felt like they were breaking you were actually the moments that were making you. And when that day comes, when you finally see what all of this was for, you will understand that pain was never the enemy. It was the process. And the person you became because of it, that is the person you were meant to be all along. There's a strange thing about life that most people don't realize until it's too late. It's not the opportunities you take that shape your destiny. It's the ones you refuse. We live in a world obsessed with opportunity, with advancement, with saying yes to everything that looks like a step forward. But what if I told you that saying yes to the wrong things can be more dangerous than saying no? What if I told you that real growth, real transformation doesn't come from chasing every opportunity? It comes from being disciplined enough to choose obedience over impulse, meaning over convenience, the right path over the easy one. Most people don't think about their lives in those terms. They assume that success is about accumulation, more achievements, more accolades, more experiences, more of whatever they've convinced themselves will make them whole. They take every job offer, every connection, every open door, because they believe that movement is the same as progress. But it's not. A person running in circles is moving, but they aren't getting anywhere. And that's what happens when you make decisions based on what looks good instead of what is good. You chase things that have no real value, no depth, no alignment with who you are meant to be. And then one day you wake up and realize that you've built a life that looks successful on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. It took me a long time to understand that not every opportunity is meant for me, that just because something is available doesn't mean it's valuable. And more importantly, that the things that truly matter, the things that define your character, that shape your purpose, often require you to walk away from things that the world tells you are important. Obedience is not a word people like to hear. It sounds restrictive, like it takes away your freedom. But what if obedience is actually the foundation of freedom? What if true freedom isn't doing whatever you want, whenever you want, but having the discipline to choose the things that will actually make you stronger, wiser, more fulfilled? Think about it. How many times have you known deep down that something wasn't right for you, but you did it anyway because it was easy, because it was convenient, because it felt good in the moment? And how many times have those decisions led to regret? That's the cost of living without direction. That's the danger of letting impulse dictate your life, because what feels good now isn't always what's good for you in the long run. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is say no to what looks like an opportunity so you can say yes to what is actually meant for you. And there were moments in my life when I had to make that choice. Moments when I had to walk away from things that seemed like they would elevate me, things that looked like they were leading me towards success, but deep down, I knew they weren't aligned with who I was supposed to be. And it wasn't easy. Because choosing obedience over opportunity means you don't always get immediate rewards. It means you don't always see the benefits right away. It means sometimes you feel like you're missing out while everyone else is moving ahead. But what I've learned is that real success isn't about speed. It's not about how fast you get somewhere. It's about making sure you're heading in the right direction in the first place. And that requires something that most people aren't willing to practice: patience, discipline, restraint. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort, to endure uncertainty, to resist the temptation to take shortcuts. And that's hard because we live in a culture that worships instant gratification, a culture that tells you that if you're not constantly climbing, constantly achieving, constantly adding more to your plate, then you're falling behind. But that's a lie. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop, take a step back and ask yourself, is this right for me? Is this in alignment with my values, my purpose, my vision? Or am I just saying yes because I'm afraid of what will happen if I say no? That's a hard question to ask yourself because it forces you to confront your own fears. The fear of missing out, the fear of failure, the fear that if you don't take every opportunity, you'll never get another one. But that fear is a trap. It keeps you in a cycle of chasing things that don't actually matter. And the truth is, the more you chase the wrong things, the further you get from the right things. The more you fill your life with meaningless distractions, the less space you have for what truly fulfills you. Obedience is about trust. It's about understanding that just because you don't see the full picture now doesn't mean you aren't on the right path. It's about having the discipline to follow what you know is right, even when it doesn't make sense to other people, even when it doesn't bring immediate rewards, even when it requires sacrifice. Because the things that truly matter, the things that bring lasting fulfillment, are never the result of impulsive decisions. They are built over time, through patience, through discipline, through the willingness to choose long-term meaning over short-term pleasure. And that's not easy. It's not glamorous. It's not what the world tells you to do, but it's the only way to build a life that is truly yours. A life that isn't just a collection of achievements, but a reflection of your deepest values. A life that isn't dictated by external validation, but guided by internal conviction. So don't be afraid to walk away from things that aren't meant for you. Don't be afraid to choose obedience over opportunity, because the things that are truly meant for you will never require you to compromise who you are to have them. And when you understand that, when you have the strength to choose what is right over what is easy, you will find something greater than success. You will find purpose. You will find peace. You will find the kind of freedom that can only come from knowing that you are exactly where you are meant to be. Life is built on responsibility. It's a heavy word, one that most people would rather avoid, because responsibility means obligation. It means sacrifice. It means the burden of carrying weight that no one else can carry for you. And in a world that glorifies freedom without consequence, that tells you to follow your heart, chase your passions, and do whatever makes you feel good in the moment, responsibility seems like the enemy. It seems like something that holds you back rather than something that propels you forward. But what if I told you that responsibility is not a burden? What if I told you that it is in fact the only real path to meaning? You see, people often mistake freedom for the ability to do whatever they want. They think that if they could just rid themselves of obligation, if they could just escape all the things that weigh them down, they would finally be happy. They dream of a life without commitments, without struggles, without anything that demands more from them than they are willing to give. But that kind of life doesn't lead to fulfillment, it leads to emptiness. Because when you strip away responsibility, when you refuse to take ownership of anything greater than yourself, you strip away purpose, you strip away the very thing that makes life worth living. I've seen what happens when people reject responsibility. I've seen what happens when they choose comfort over challenge, when they decide that life owes them something instead of recognizing that they owe something to life. And the result is always the same: a slow descent into resentment, a deep gnawing dissatisfaction that they can't quite explain. They chase pleasure, they chase distraction, they chase anything that will numb the reality that they are not who they were meant to be. Because deep down, whether we admit it or not, we all crave meaning. And meaning is not found in ease, it is found in the weight you willingly carry. The strongest people you will ever meet are not the ones who have avoided struggle, but the ones who have chosen to bear it. The ones who have taken on responsibilities that extend beyond themselves, who have decided that their lives are not just about what they can get, but about what they can give. And when you start to understand this, when you start to see responsibility not as a burden, but as a gift, everything changes. Because responsibility gives you direction. It forces you to grow. It demands that you become more than you were yesterday. And that kind of transformation does not come from passivity. It does not come from waiting for life to hand you meaning. It comes from stepping up, from embracing the challenges that others run from deciding that you are willing to carry the weight that others refuse to carry. And it's not easy. It requires sacrifice. It requires discipline. It requires you to do things that you don't always feel like doing. But that's the point, because the person who only does what is easy never becomes anything more than what they already are. And if you refuse responsibility, if you refuse to take ownership of your life, then someone else will dictate it for you. The world is filled with people who have allowed their circumstances, their past, their fears to define them simply because they were unwilling to take control of their own destiny. But you have a choice. You can decide right now that you will no longer be a victim of your own life. That you will no longer sit idly by while the days pass, waiting for something to change. That you will take responsibility for yourself, for your actions, for your future. And when you do that, when you fully embrace the weight of that responsibility, you will discover something incredible. You are capable of far more than you ever imagined. You see, people are always searching for confidence. They want to feel strong, capable, unstoppable. But confidence is not something you can fake. It is not something you can conjure up with empty affirmations or wishful thinking. Real confidence is earned. It is built through the trials you endure, through the weight you carry, through the responsibilities you take on despite the difficulty. Because when you prove to yourself time and time again that you can handle more than you thought you could, you start to believe in your own strength. And that is a power that no one can take from you. But if you avoid responsibility, if you refuse to carry the weight that is meant for you, you rob yourself of that strength. You rob yourself of the opportunity to grow into the person you were meant to be. And in the end, you are left with nothing but regret. Because there is nothing more painful than looking back on your life and realizing that you could have been so much more if only you had been willing to take on the challenge. So don't run from responsibility. Don't be afraid of the weight. Don't look for the easy way out. Because the life you want, the fulfillment you crave, the person you are meant to become, it's all waiting for you on the other side of responsibility. And once you embrace that, once you take ownership of your life in a way that most people never will, you will understand something that very few ever do. That the weight was never meant to break you, it was meant to build you. People spend their entire lives searching for something. They don't always know what it is. Sometimes they call it happiness, sometimes success, sometimes fulfillment. They chase it through achievements, relationships, material things, hoping that if they just acquire enough, if they just check the right boxes, they will finally feel whole. But they don't, because what they are really searching for isn't external, it's internal, it's meaning. And meaning is not something you find, it's something you create. You see, most people don't think about their lives in terms of meaning. They think in terms of pleasure, in terms of comfort, in terms of avoiding pain. They want a life that feels good, not necessarily a life that is good. But there is a problem with that way of thinking because pleasure fades, comfort is temporary, and a life built on avoiding difficulty is not a life at all. It's an existence, a slow, quiet resignation to mediocrity. There's a reason why people who seem to have everything, money, fame, admiration, often feel empty. It's because they have mistaken distraction for fulfillment. They have filled their lives with noise, with movement, with things that keep them busy, but not with things that give them purpose. And purpose is not something that can be bought. It's not something that can be handed to you. It's something you must build. But building meaning in your life requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires sacrifice. It requires discipline. It requires taking on responsibility, not because you have to, but because you choose to. It requires orienting yourself toward something greater than yourself, toward a goal, toward an ideal, toward a future that is worth the struggle. And that's where people get lost. They don't know what they should aim at. They don't know what should guide them. And so they wander. They let the world dictate their path. They follow trends. They follow desires. They follow whatever seems easiest in the moment, hoping that somehow along the way they will stumble into meaning. But meaning does not reveal itself to the aimless. It only reveals itself to those who are willing to make a decision, to choose something, to commit to something, to dedicate themselves to something, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when it requires more of them than they think they can give. And that's terrifying. Because choosing a path means letting go of all the other possibilities. It means closing doors, setting limitations, making sacrifices, and people don't like that. They want to keep their options open. They want to avoid the discomfort of commitment. But what they don't realize is that refusing to choose is still a choice. And it's a choice that leads nowhere. Because meaning is not found in infinite possibilities. It is found in the depth of a single pursuit. It is found in going all in on something, in giving yourself fully to something, in dedicating yourself so completely that your life becomes intertwined with your purpose. That is where fulfillment is, not in surface level distractions, not in endless choices, but in commitment, in responsibility, in the willingness to bear the weight of something meaningful, even when it's hard. And here's the thing, meaning is not always grand. It's not always about changing the world or achieving something extraordinary. Sometimes it's about being the kind of person that others can depend on. Sometimes it's about showing up day after day for the people who need you. Sometimes it's about taking care of your family, about doing the work that needs to be done, about becoming someone who brings strength and stability to those around them. Because that is meaningful. That is what makes life worth living. But people overlook that. They chase an abstract idea of success instead of grounding themselves in the reality of what truly matters. They think meaning has to be some grand, elusive thing, when in reality it is built in the smallest of moments. It is built in the way you live every single day, in the choices you make, in the integrity you uphold, in the discipline you practice. Because meaning does not just happen. It is something you earn. And it is earned through struggle, through sacrifice, through the willingness to take on the burden of responsibility and carry it forward with purpose. And the moment you truly understand that, the moment you stop running from difficulty and start embracing it as the pathway to something greater, everything changes. You stop chasing happiness because you realize happiness is a byproduct of a meaningful life, not the goal of it. You stop fearing hardship because you realize that struggle is what shapes you. You stop searching for something external to complete you because you realize that meaning is not given, it is built every single day in the way you choose to live. And when you commit to that, when you decide that you will no longer drift, that you will no longer live passively, but instead you will take ownership of your life and build something with it, that is when you become truly free. Not because life becomes easy, not because the struggles disappear, but because you finally understand why you are here. Because you finally have something worth fighting for, because you finally know that no matter how difficult the road, you are walking towards something real. And in the end, that is what matters. That is what makes all of this worthwhile, because a life without meaning is not a life at all. It is an existence. And you were meant for more than that. You were meant to carry something, to build something, to live a life of depth and purpose. And when you do, when you fully embrace that weight, you will find what you have been searching for all along.